Let's talk about the state of North Carolina schools in the midst of coronavirus. You've got parents we've seen protesting who want their children back in class. We've seen some parents who say absolutely not, I don't want my kids back in class. You've got some teachers who say they're ready to go back, and some teachers who say absolutely not, I'm not going back. So what metrics would you use to determine whether it's time, even on a district by district basis, to go back in the classroom?
I think the key there is district by district. I think that this should be a local decision that is made by local health officials as well as local superintendents. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the goalpost has moved throughout this COVID process when it comes to schools reopening. At first it was about flattening the curve, and then it became about, well, we can't go back until there's no cases and we have a vaccine. And I think that the Department of Health and Human Services is really responsible for providing those metrics, and it turns out that they have said it is safe for kids to go back to school, which is why the governor put Plan A back on the table for at least for K-5. So I think that it's also important to realize that it's possible for schools to reopen, giving parents a choice and giving teachers a choice. Teachers who are immunocompromised and for whom it's not safe to be back in school should have the option to teach remotely. Just as parents need to have the choice to say, my child needs to be back in school, or my child cannot be back in school for this reason, and then we put those two groups together and hopefully the problem is solved.
North Carolina is a very rural state. Broadband, a huge issue for a lot of students who live in these very rural communities or simply can't afford it. How do you fix the inequities that occur because of the lack of broadband? So
there are some in-state solutions that we can continue to expand upon that include working with, there are some provider in the east called Cloudwise, and then there are some providers in the west that are kind of the same type of provider of services for our more remote areas. We have grants that have been given by the General Assembly through the governor's office called GREAT, which have to do with grants that will allow for there to be more robust Wi-Fi in those communities. But actually, this is a case where the state and state leaders need to be working with the federal government because they own the spectrum that we need to have robust Wi-Fi across our state. And so this is a challenge that will be solved at both the state and the federal level.
I want to talk about school funding. Every year we hear there's just not enough, and you know, in many instances, it's the truth. It's not enough. But how do you address that issue and achievement at the same time? How do you balance those two?
Yeah, that's a great question because 67% of 8th graders in North Carolina start high school not reading and doing math proficiently. And we are average compared to the rest of the country. And yet we're spending more money on education than ever before. Right now in North Carolina, we are targeting resources to 3 different groups in particular. So everybody's got the same amount of base funding from the state. That's the way our funding system works in North Carolina. And it's about $7,900 per student. But then if a school has children with exceptional needs, English language learners, and children who are low-income students, they receive an allotment for each of those kinds of students so that they have more funding. That's called targeted funding as opposed to a blanket strategy of funding. And so consequently, we fund high poverty schools at a rate of 33% higher than our non-high poverty schools. And so I think that when we think about the fact that achievement hasn't moved, we haven't moved the needle for achievement for our students of color and our low-income students for close to 40 years. These numbers have been stagnant and in some cases have fallen. So I guess my point is that no matter which political party has been in charge and no matter how much money we've appropriated or not appropriated, we haven't moved the needle on achievement for students. So we have to stop doing the same thing over and over again, do some root cause analysis and figure out why this is.
So do you think that it just, again, sort of like coronavirus, district by district, perhaps?
I think that funding is district by district already.
But I mean, even more macro.
So yes, because county level funding constitutes 27% of a district's funding, and that is where the inequities lie, because that funding is based on a county's tax base. So yes, definitely.
So I want to talk about charter schools. What should the criteria be for a charter school to open and a charter school to remain open?
The charter school application packet is about this thick. When I was Governor McCrory's education advisor, part of my job was working with the Charter School Advisory Board at those applications to see, to make recommendations to the State Board of Education, who ultimately decides whether or not a charter school is able to open. It is extremely rigorous process. It is very cumbersome, and most charter schools are turned down the first time, and then they can always come back. I mean, I remember reviewing applications where it was their fourth time around. The State Board of Education then closes down charter schools that are not performing or are not being good stewards of the money that they have. That's a very different set of criteria for traditional public schools. Charter schools are public schools in North Carolina, but we don't shut down neighborhood schools that are low performing.
Should this be different? Should the fact that you can shut down a charter school period change?
I think that charter schools should continue to be shut down when they are not fulfilling the promise of their charter and they are not serving their communities the way that they are supposed to. I think for traditional public schools, what we need to do is reinvigorate the district school transformation division at the Department of Public Instruction so that we can do a better job of providing supports to students who are trapped in failing schools.
Teacher pay certainly has been a headline for decades and decades in North Carolina. Just one of the factors when it comes to recruitment. What would you do to better improve your sell to teachers outside of North Carolina or even in North Carolina to stay in North Carolina to work for the public school system?
Yeah. So most teachers do stay in North Carolina. The retention or the attrition rate for teachers is about the same in North Carolina as it is in the banking industry, for example. So I don't think that we're losing teachers in droves. I think that it's important to, if we want to retain our great teachers, we have to offer them opportunities to move up in the field the way any of us might move up in our chosen fields. And we do have legislation that provides for that. It's called advanced teaching roles, and it allows teachers to take on more responsibility, earn more pay while staying in the classroom and not moving to administration. I think that needs to be expanded statewide. As far as recruiting more teachers, we need to do a better job of sharing the entire compensation package that a teacher receives. What are they getting? What is the value of their health care? What is the value of their retirement benefits? I would also say that we need to be more creative about the way we attract new teachers. I believe that tuition reimbursements are a great idea, especially to attract teachers to areas where they might not want to go and teach, someplace more remote or rural or low performing. I visited Halifax County a couple of weeks ago, and a local resident there is rehabbing an old apartment building in their downtown in Littleton. And it is just the most fantastic thing. And these teachers then can come and live for free, and while they teach in what has historically been a low performing school district.
It's about communities stepping up and making a difference to recruit the best teachers.
Yes.
And who can afford to live in their community.
That's exactly right.
I want to talk about Mark Johnson for a second. I'm going to put you on the spot. What's he done right, and what could he have done better?
I think moving the Center for Safer Schools from the Department of Public Safety to the Department of Public Instruction was a good idea. I think that he has tried to do some things that were outside of the box, but I think that when you start off, anytime someone comes into office and the first thing that happens is a lawsuit, I think that's problematic. I think that the State Board of Education that we have right now, they are a very high functioning board, and I think that there has to be healing between the Office of State Superintendent and the State Board of Education. And I would recommend that to whomever is elected that they make every effort to work with this board, because again, these are folks that give up an incredible amount of personal time to serve on the State Board of Education. And they're doing so because they have a passion for education and for children.
How do you differ from your opponent?
My opponent and I both have been classroom teachers, and I think my experiences diverge from that point. I have spent, I've had a lot of different kinds of education experiences. So I did teach for 10 years. I served as a turnaround coach in high poverty schools for 3 years across the country. I've been a governor's education advisor. I worked at the UNC system under President Spellings, and now I lead a nonprofit 100% online university, Western Governors University, North Carolina. Our mission is to expand access to higher education for those who wouldn't have it otherwise. And so I would consider myself an expert in online education, which is something we could use right now. My opponent is the endorsed candidate of the Teachers Union, which is a very controversial organization in North Carolina. And I think that when we talk about organizations like the NCAE, for me, they while they may serve a purpose for teachers, they're not a student-centered organization. And quite often, and right now we're seeing that, they become more of a political organization. I would like to see the politics taken out of this position. Most states do not elect their state superintendent. We are one of a handful that do this. I would actually prefer that this role not be elected. I think it's too politicized as it is. But yes, those are just a few of the differences between us.
And the last question for you, as we are dealing with coronavirus and an economy that's a mess in many ways for North Carolinians, what would you say as someone's pondering over that ballot right now and trying to figure out how they want to vote when it comes to state school superintendent? What would you say to them to put their mind at ease?
To put their mind at ease about me or about moving forward?
Of moving forward within public education right now.
North Carolina has so many pockets of excellence going on in our public schools right now. I mean, the kinds of innovation that you would maybe expect to see in our larger districts, we actually see in some of our smallest low-income districts. And those kinds of innovations and just sheer determination on the part of those districts to provide an exceptional education experience for their students really give me hope. We have superintendents out there who are embracing the charter school in their community, as well as the private school in their community and the homeschool parents in their community, and really viewing children as everyone's responsibility. It's just like what you said about the community. It really does take a whole community to make education work for every child. And that is something that gives me hope. That is something that I hope to leverage if I'm elected, because parents have got to have a voice in what happens to their child's education. And I think that these smaller districts are just great templates for how we can do that on a larger scale.
Thanks so much for spending so much time with us today.
Thank you.